To me, April is what many anglers look forward to all year long. It is one of the best times of the year to fish, in my opinion. You have a good chance of catching your next personal best bass this time of year, especially if you know which lures can trigger a bass to bite. Whenever it comes to selecting lures to use in April, it is important to remember how much changes throughout the month as a whole. Depending on where you're at in the country, some bass will be up shallow getting ready to spawn, or potentially some have already started to spawn. However, generally most bass should be already or close to pushing up shallow to spawn, depending on where you're at in the country, but a good majority of it, they should be pretty close or they should already be shallow. Also, many places across the southern part of the country are already in the post spawn. It was difficult to select 5 lures to talk about today, but these 5 lures will work in many situations throughout the whole country. Since it was so hard to pick 5 lures, I have decided to throw in an extra lure in the top 5. Let me know down below if you agree or disagree with my top 5 baits for April down in the comment section down below. Also, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. We are on the way to 5K by the end of the year, and I would love to have you join the community. At the time of recording this video, we are so close to 2K. We're literally right now sitting, I think, almost at like 1990. So potentially by the time you're seeing this video, I've already hit 2K. So I just wanted to say thank you so much if you're already subscribed. And if not, please consider subscribing. It would help out the channel a ton. The first lure I want to talk about today is the chatterbait. The chatterbait is one of my favorite moving baits, and it especially shines around grass. The chatterbait is one of the best search baits you can throw and can trigger some explosive strikes during the spring, especially in the month of April. The chatterbait can be fished in many different situations and is a very versatile lure to have in your tackle box. Personally, I like to use a Z-Man jackhammer because of how quickly the blade will start vibrating whenever it hits the water. However, it is best to experiment with different types of bladed jigs to figure out what works best in your area. The chatterbait does good in many water conditions, but my favorite time to throw it is in stained or muddy water. However, the chatterbait will do great in clear water too. One of the best things you could do when fishing a chatterbait is changing up your retrieve. One of my favorite ways to fish the chatterbait is letting it sink to the bottom and giving it a hard pop, then letting it sink back down again. This will trigger a nice reaction strike out of the bass, and something about this retrieval drives them crazy. The retrieve resembles a dying bait fish, and the bass will almost take the rod out of your hand, they hit it so hard. I also like to fish the chatterbait on a steady retrieve, but it really depends on what the bass are wanting for that day. Next time you're out on the water during this month, make sure you have a chatterbait tied on. This thing catches some giant fish, and I promise you will not regret having it tied on. The second lure I wanted to talk about today is the square-bill crankbait. The square-bill crankbait is one of my favorite ways to target shallow bass whenever they are in the pre-spawn stage feeding up. The square-bill is such an effective lure to use, especially to get some huge bass to bite. When fishing a square-bill, I will cast over where I think the bass will be and then burn the square-bill back, trying to trigger a reaction strike out of the bass. One of the best ways to trigger a reaction strike is by deflecting the square-bill off of any type of cover that you may come across. And whenever it deflects or hits anything, that's normally whenever the bass will hit it. The square-bill can be fished in muddy water conditions and also in clear water. Some of my favorite stained or muddy water colors are chartreuse and red this time of year. However, whenever I'm fishing in clear water, I like to go with more natural colors, but most often than not, this time of year, I like to use like a bluegill pattern or anything that they would really be feeding on, or even just a crawfish color. Crawfish color does well too. Throwing a square-bill this time of year is really addictive, and you will not want to put it down whenever you get on a good square-bill bite. It was hard for me to just select 5 lures for the month of April, so I decided to add a bonus lure to this list. The bonus lure I decided to pick for this month was the wacky rig. The wacky rig is one of my favorite finesse techniques this time of year due to the larger profile in the water. I especially love using a wacky rig when targeting largemouth, but also have success targeting spots and smallmouth with it. The wacky rig is a versatile rig due to how much you can change the presentation of it by changing up what type of worm you're using and what type of hook you use. It can be fished in many different scenarios and shines when targeting shallow bass. I caught a decent bass while I was down on Gunnersville throwing a wacky rig. Many people don't like to throw the wacky rig because they think they will not catch any big fish when throwing this. I am here to tell you today that this rig will catch some giant bass. Whenever I was on Gunnersville, I was catching all of my bass in less than a foot of water. Whenever I see shallow water, one of the first things that pops in my head is the wacky rig, especially whenever I need to skip it underneath anything. I like to skip the wacky rig under docks and under branches that are hanging over the water. Normally I will trigger a reaction strike once I get it up in there. If you do not have a wacky rig tied on this time of year, you are truly missing out on one of the best finesse techniques you can use. The third lure I want to talk about is the lipless crankbait. The lipless crankbait can be fished throughout the whole water column and is one of the most versatile lures you can throw in April, depending on how you fish it. My favorite way to fish the lipless crankbait is by utilizing the yo-yo technique. The yo-yo technique is whenever you let your lipless crankbait flutter down and then lift the lipless crankbait back up with your rod. Kind of similar to how you would fish a jig. By repeating this process, you can get some good quality bites. I feel like not many people utilize the yo-yo technique, and I have caught some giant bass fishing it this way. The other way to fish the lipless crankbait is bumping it across the bottom, working it as slow as possible. I normally like to fish the lipless crankbait as slow as I can get away with. By slowing the lipless crankbait down, you will catch some good quality bass in your local body of water. To give the lipless crankbait some more action, try adding rod twitches in your retrieve. This will cause a reaction strike out of the bass and you will catch a giant. The fourth lure I'm going to talk about is the jig. The jig is probably one of my favorite lures to throw all year. A jig can produce some huge bites during the month of April, especially if you're targeting them while they're on beds. The large profile of a jig works especially well whenever they are on beds and will make them defensively try to get your jig off of their bed. Imitating a bluegill or going with a solid white color so you can see it, depending on how stained and muddy your water is one of the best ways to go whenever you're fishing a jig this time of year, especially whenever targeting bedding bass. However, make sure you do not release them far away from their beds and make sure you get them back in the water as close to their beds as soon as possible. A jig is a very versatile lure and can be fished in many different situations depending on where you're fishing at in the country. The jig can be used to catch shallow bass whenever they are getting ready to spawn, and can be also used in deeper water when the bass are still sitting deep, depending on where you're at in the country. The jig can also be fished in many different scenarios around rocks, vegetation, and different types of structure, depending on which style jig head you are using. The drawing power of a large profile jig can result in some huge bites during the month of April. Do you have confidence throwing a jig? Let me know down below, I'm curious. The fifth lure I'm going to talk about is the Texas rig. The Texas rig is a good choice this time of year because of how many different presentations you can do with this, depending on if you peg it, the weight, and the plastic you decide to use. Make sure you experiment with the Texas rig to figure out what to imitate and what works best for you. Personally, I like to peg the weight on my Texas rig so it doesn't get hung up as much, but it really depends on where you're fishing and what type of cover and structure you are fishing around, if you're going to peg it or not. However, a lot of people like to fish the Texas rig weightless, and this especially shines during the month of April, especially whenever they're pushed up shallow. The Texas rig can be fished pretty much anywhere, no matter if they're shallow or out deeper. The Texas rig will catch them in pretty much every scenario. You can change up the retrieve and fish the Texas rig many different ways. However, my favorite way to fish the Texas rig is by dragging it slowly across the bottom or through structure. You can get some nice sized bass doing this, and it's hands down one of the most versatile lures on this list with how many ways you can rig it and the different ways that you can fish it. If you do not have a Texas rig tied on, you are missing out on one of the best bites that you can have during the whole month of April. These are my top 5 lures to use in the month of April, and using these lures will help you catch more bass this month. It was hard to select 5 lures and a bonus lure to use for this whole month, but these 6 lures will work in many conditions across the country. If you have any questions or comments, let me know down below. I'd love to hear back from you guys. Also, let me know if you agree or disagree with my top 5 baits for the month of April in the comments section down below. Also, let me know if I missed one of your favorite lures to use during the month of April. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button to help the video in the YouTube algorithm so more people can get recommended this video. If you are not subscribed, I would love to have you join the community It would mean so much to me, especially if you made it this far, and so you don't miss out on future uploads. I plan on doing more videos like this in the future, releasing one of these probably every week or so. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Also, make sure you follow me on Instagram. I'll have it linked down below too. If you want to know a good technique that catches bass all year round, make sure you check out this video right here. I promise you won't be disappointed.